QSO Today episode 339, Bob Allphin, K4UEE. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver, now shipping from your favorite amateur radio dealer. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth for Z1UG, your host. Preparations are continuing for the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, where Flex Radio is the platinum sponsor. The expo will return on March 12, 2021. We are using some new technology that includes lounges and tables. You can potentially meet me in my lounge that is open 24/7. Go to the Ham Expo website and click on the lounge menu item at the top of the page. Bob Allphin, K4UEE, was my guest in May of 2016. As he is one of the speakers in the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, I thought you'd enjoy this reprise of my QSO with Bob. The following is my original introduction. My guest today has traveled the world in pursuit of activating DX entities that are isolated, desolate, and uninhabited, 40 in total. Out of his love for travel, he has been to 126 countries during his lifetime. I know that you will enjoy my QSO Today with Bob Allphin, K4UEE. K4UEE, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Bob?
Roger, 4Z1UG, K4UEE, you're 5 and 9.
Bob, thanks for joining me on QSO Today. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
I got interested in radio when I was in the Boy Scouts. And this story is not unusual. I know a lot of people who were in the Scouts and were working on the Radio Merit Badge. And in my particular case, my dad was stationed in Hawaii at that point, and the Scoutmaster there happened to be a ham. So we built a crystal set, which was one of the main requirements, I think, of getting the Radio Merit Badge. And, you know, I had the bathroom toilet tissue cardboard tube, and we made a coil, wrapped wire around that, and then we had a little germanium diode and some World War II surplus headphones, and I threw a wire out the window. And I remember I didn't have any insulators, so I used Coke bottles for my antenna. Anyway, I could hear music, and I could hear talking coming through the air. And I thought it was magic. And in fact, here we are some 55, 60 years later. I still think it's magic, Eric, and I was hooked.
I had the same experience with the crystal set, and I'm still hooked.
Exactly. It's an amazing, amazing hobby, and I'm so glad that I was led to it. Yeah.
Did you have any mentors or Elmers who helped you along?
This beginning I just described was probably at age 8 or 9. And Dad, again, was in the military, so we were moving about every year or two. So I never really found a mentor until we ended up in Birmingham, Alabama. And that was in 1957. So at that point I was 13. So there's 4 or 5 years there where I was kind of floundering. I was buying, little regenerative receivers and becoming a shortwave listener. But I never really found anybody until I got to Birmingham that could act as a mentor. And a neighbor, he was in the next block, Jim Wilson, W4RKS, stepped up and said, "Bob, here's what you need to do, and here's the path to follow, and I'll be happy to help you." So I got licensed at age 14. I think it was in April of 1958, so I hate to say it, but that's 58 years ago. Boy, it's gone fast.
So you got your novice license in 1958 at age 14. What was your call sign?
Well, KN4UEE. I've used a lot of call signs over the years, but my basic home call sign has never changed.
And you've obviously had a lot of opportunity to even change it with a vanity license. You never wanted a vanity license.
I looked at that. The only thing that made any sense was K4BA for Bob Allphin or N4BA. And, I just thought to myself, I like K4UEE. It's not the best CW call, but I seem to get through okay, and people recognize it and recognize me. And, I guess I didn't want to run the risk of getting lost.
Yeah, I hear you. I've had the same call sign as well for 40 plus years, and I just can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
So how did you feel being a new novice with the ability now to transmit?
Well, after all those years of listening, and of course I did the SWL thing and then zeroed in on the ham bands. I think it probably had an S38D, Hallicrafter's S38D is in Delta, and was listening on the ham bands. And I had been given a surplus 80 meter only 20-watt transmitter. And my recollection is that this thing was used in electronics training. It was for 20 watts, it was a good sized piece of equipment. But I think when young Air Force guys were learning the basics of electronics, they built this transmitter. And I happened to come in, somebody gave me one. And so I had that thing sitting there hooked up to a light bulb. And I would practice my CW, and I would practice what I was going to do when that license came through the mail. So I'll never forget, the license arrived. I mean, I'd taken the exam, and back then it came through the mail, and you had to wait about 6 weeks, if I recall. So it came in the mail one day, and I said, oh my, what do I do now? I said, well, I guess I'll go call CQ and see what happens. So I called CQ about 3 or 4 times. This is, again, on 3714. I had one crystal. After about an hour, somebody called me back. And instead of answering him, I jumped up, ran around the house, yelling, somebody's calling me, somebody's calling me. What am I going to do? And my mother calmly says, well, Bob, why don't you go answer him? So I did. I made my first QSO, and it was a guy in a little town called Gadsden. It's not a little town, a medium-sized town in Alabama named Gadsden, Alabama. It was about 60 miles away. But, it was like working somebody on the moon. It was a great, great thrill.
Well, you've got a picture on your K4UEE.com website of you as a novice sitting there at your station. What's the transmitter? Is that the transmitter you're talking about, the one with the plastic cover or glass cover or whatever that is?
That is the one, yes, Eric. And that is a handcrafted screen to block RFI that I made out of a screen. So we put that on there to keep it from, tearing up the TVs back in that day. I think it helped a little bit, but not much.
Nicely soldered corners there.
They are nicely done. It looks, in fact, as I look at the same picture, somebody must have helped me with that.
For the listeners, I'll post the link to this picture and this biography.
Yeah, okay.
From Bob's website on the show notes page. You have a knife switch on the left corner of that desk there.
Sure.
What is that?
Well, that's the way you switched your antenna from transmit to receive. And it was an 80-meter dipole. And I remember it was because of the size of the lot we were on, it was at 90 degrees rather than stretched out straight. It bent at the feed point, 90 degrees. So that feed line, which I think was that 72-ohm twin lead we used to use, came into that switch. And then when I had it in one position, it was switched to the transmitter. And then when I was through transmitting and time to listen, I threw the switch and connected that antenna to the receiver. That's the way we used to do it. Some of the rich kids had TR switches, but not me.
Did you have break and keying with the transmitter, or did you actually, when you flipped the switch, you were in transmit?
When I flipped the switch, the antenna was then connected, and I would key the transmitter, and then when it was time to listen, I'd switch that antenna in the other position. Yeah.
You were a young ham from the looks of the pictures. From your story so far, you're 14 years old. What kind of impact did ham radio have on a kid who moved with the family all over the world?
Well, that's a good question. I would have to say that experience of being an Air Force dependent, or some people refer to them as Air Force brats, that experience of moving from place to place fairly often and being faced with leaving friends behind and, making new friends in the new location, I think was a big part of forming who I am today. For one thing, I loved travel. I looked forward to going to that new place and making new friends. And of course, in this hobby, with all the traveling that I've done, most of it the result of the hobby. I've visited 126 countries now, and just about every one of those countries I've met some of the local hams, and it's just a big part of my life to be able to be interested in traveling. Some people called it itchy feet. If I've been one place too long, then my feet start itching and it's time to go. I think the other thing that probably made it fun is that once I got the license, it didn't make much difference where I was, because I could still stay in touch, with people that I had met or old friends that I had left behind, because many of them were hams as well. And that was fun. I remember we were transferred to Okinawa when I was 17. I finished high school in Okinawa. Which is a whole different story, because that's kind of where my DXing and de-expeditioning career began. We can cover that if you like, but I remember I spent an awful lot of time trying to work the guys back home, from basically 10,000 miles away.
Or it seemed that way.
Yeah, exactly.
How did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your career in education?
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure a lot of people that you've interviewed, Eric, have said that because of amateur radio and their interest in electronics, they started a business in electronics, or they, followed a career that they could trace back to their early interest in electronics. That wasn't the case with me. I always had the interest, but I went off to college thinking I was going to be an electrical engineer. So, maybe that was a result of, being a ham and all of that. And I figured, gosh, the first year at college is going to be really easy, because I already know how to solder. So that, I should breeze right through the freshman year. Well, I found out that in order to be an electrical engineer, you had to understand and calculus. And that's where I met my demise. So I ended up in industrial management. And then I went in the Air Force for 5 years. And while in the Air Force, I gravitated towards the electronic warfare side of the business. So I guess that's another example of maybe how my interests helped me decide what I was going to do. I was an instructor in the electronic warfare school. So we were teaching students who, at that point, many of them were going into Strategic Air Command, because an electronic warfare officer was on all B-52s. And, of course, the other half of the class was going to Southeast Asia. Then when I got out of the service, I got interested, got out, became, employed here in Atlanta, and started building a new station. But I guess looking back on it, yeah, the fact that I wanted to be a double E was probably prompted by my interest, but I failed at that, and ended up getting a management degree. And then I was, an electronic warfare side of it. And then when I got out of the service, my career was in sales, in investment sales. So, unlike the guy who started a little company in the electronic business, or went to work for Motorola, or somebody like that, my career path was only slightly affected by my interest in electronics.
And now this message from ICOM America. Love is in the air at ICOM. This sweetheart of a package includes the ICOM IC705, the perfect sidekick for hams that like to enjoy what is both great outdoors and indoors. The ICOM IC705 is the perfect companion, with its base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingertips in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at just over 2 pounds with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. This fine rig supports QRP and QRPP operations. Features include a 4.3-inch color touchscreen with a live band scope and waterfall display, 5-watt transmitter power with a BP272, and 10 watts out with a 13.8 DC supply, single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions, micro USB connector, Bluetooth, and wireless LAN, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone is standard equipment. Of course, the perfect accessory for the IC705 is the now available optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your ICOM IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or a day social distancing in the park. Let us not forget that the IC705 will replace the other company's radio as the first choice of microwave operators who need the very best baseband rig. Finally, there is a whole list of accessories and software for the IC705. For more information, go to ICOM's website by clicking on the banner ad in this episode's show notes page. The ICOM IC705 is in stock at your favorite ham radio dealer. And when you make that purchase, be sure to tell your salesman that you heard about the IC705 here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO Today. What kind of impact does amateur radio have on your family life?
Well, I think probably my wife, when we were dating, did not know that I was a ham. I think looking back on it, if she had, now I'm not going to ask her if this is true or not, I'm just speculating, that maybe if she had known I was a ham and known what was ahead, she would have looked for somebody else. But I'm joking, of course, but at least I think I am. I would say that the fact that I spend an awful lot of time now that I'm retired, and even prior to that, planning and participating in the expeditions, and I'm away from home, just means that she's a very forgiving and understanding person. She understands how important it is to me and is willing to, spend weeks on end, with our kids who happen to live locally and our grandkids. I've been away on 3 different occasions for 6 or 7 weeks. Usually when you go to the Antarctic region, it takes that long, 2 weeks to get there and 2 weeks to do the expedition and 2 weeks to get home. So that's quite a sacrifice. But so far so good. We've been married almost 49 years, and she's quite a special lady, and certainly I thank her often for being so accommodating to my hobby.
Did any of your children follow you into the hobby?
No. One of the regrets that I have is that I was never able to get them interested. I do have one grandson who has shown some interest, but he's now just turned 14. Soon, well, he's about to turn 15, and I'm afraid that I may have missed my opportunity because he is about to be overcome by fumes. By that I mean perfumes and gas fumes. So I probably I've had influence on other family members. Members of other families, but not in my own family. But again, they're very supportive, and for the most part, they understand how important it is to me.
What rig do you operate now?
Well, I've got 2 transceivers. My primary rig is a K3, Elecraft K3. And I've got a matching KPA 500, and I've got I think it's called a P1, the little pan adapter. So what I use 90% of the time is that little 3-piece Elecraft rig that you see prominently pictured in their ads, and I love it. We are even using the K3s now, mostly on our DXpeditions. Also have an ICOM 756 Pro 3. That is the backup rig. I've got a K2, I've got a K1, I've got an IC 706, and then I've also got an Alpha 77, which I use mostly for operating on the low bands.
So are all these radios in your ham station, and you can switch between them?
The 706 is set up at my mother-in-law's home up in northeast Alabama. So when I go up there, which is about once a month, I can get on the air for a little while. Everything else is in the ham shack here in Atlanta or Marietta. And I do have it set up so I can switch between the radios and between the amplifiers. And I've got a number of antennas that I switch between as well.
As an avid DXer and DXpeditioner, what's your favorite rig?
I'd say the K3.
Hands down.
Yep. I'm primarily a CW operator, and I just like the way it works. I like the sound. I like the filtering. It's a great radio. Not that the others aren't, but it really fits me.
It was designed by CW operators primarily.
Wayne Burdick and can't remember the other fellow's name. I guess they are CW. I know they were QRP enthusiasts because the first radios they came out with were QRP radios. But I guess if you're QRP, you're also probably a CW enthusiast.
How did you develop your love for contesting in DX?
Well, I think let's take the DXing side of it first. I mentioned earlier that Dad was in the Air Force and transferred to Okinawa. I had been licensed just a couple of 3 years when that transfer took place. So I was in Okinawa with my radio, my DX40, and my Night-Kit R100, and I inherited a quad, two-element quad from a guy who had been in Okinawa and operated there, and then was being transferred back to the States. So he gave me that antenna. So here I am at what was then a DXCC country, DXCC entity, KR6LY, KR6 Lonesome Yankee. And I was, for the first time in my life, on the other end of the pileup, other end of the DX pileup, and I loved it. The challenge of having multiple stations calling you and being able to pick them out and then exchange a report and get them in the log, was very satisfying to me. It still is today, maybe even more so today. But anyway, I was hooked on being DX rather than being the DXer. And that's, I attribute that experience to my interest in being, on DXpeditions now. But here at home, I've worked them all. I've got them all on mixed, and I've got them all on phone. The only thing I lack is a contact with North Korea on CW, and then I can say it's all complete. But my main theme, what I've been doing for years now, probably 30 years, is participating in or leading or co-leading or organizing in some fashion DXpeditions. The specialty is my specialty, and the specialty of the guys that I prefer to travel with is activating the really rare DXCC entities. In fact, if I might be allowed to brag a little bit here, I have activated 11 of the DXCC top 10 most wanted. And, some people get a little confused. How can you activate 11 of the top 10? Well, obviously, once you've been there, they're not in the top 10 anymore. And whoever was number 11, whatever DXCC entity was number 11, moves up. So anyway, I hope to do a couple more of those. They're difficult. They are time consuming. They're expensive. They're rare in the top 10 because of the fact that they're either hard to get to, or they're expensive to get to, or you don't want to go to them, or there's some political reason like North Korea, for example, where, they don't allow amateur operations. So that's the DX side of it. The contesting is something I got interested in. I guess when I was in Okinawa, I participated in a couple of contests. I wasn't competitive at all, but it was fun, and I enjoyed it and got a certificate or two. It wasn't easy, or I should say it was easy, to win a certificate as the top scorer from KR6, because I was oftentimes the only guy from Okinawa who was entering the contest. But I really, I guess the turning point was in 1979 when a group of us from the Atlanta area in the Southeastern DX Club went down to St. Kitts, made several trips down, and shipped a bunch of equipment and towers and antennas down there, and built one of the first really mega stations. And then in 1979 in the CQ Worldwide sideband contest, we set a new world record. The previous record had been 29 million points. We scored 37 million, and I just thought that was great fun, setting everything up and then operating with other guys and then achieving some great success like that. But afterwards, I got more interested in operating single band, single operator contests. Went back to in this case Aruba, starting in 1986. I visited Aruba on 17 different occasions, operating or preparing to operate. And always entered the contest as a single operator on a single band. So the first success I had was in 1986, I believe it was. I set a new world record on CW, 80-meter CW, in the CQ Worldwide CW contest. I went back the following year, same hotel, same antenna, same setup, and set a record on phone. And then somewhere along the line, a record from Paraguay on 15 CW. Anyway, I lose track, but 6 single band, single operator world records.
Bob, how did you decide which band you were going to operate from Aruba, for example? Why 80?
Well, because I'm not one of these guys who can stay up and operate for 48 hours, which is what's required if you're going to enter, for example, on, say, 20 meters, which is open, around the clock. And if you're going to try to win, certainly if you're going to try to break the record, you've got to operate the full 48 hours or, 46 certainly. So I picked the bands where I could get some sleep. And 80 meters is not open during the daytime, so I could stay up all night and do my best and then rest, and a couple hours before sunset, sit down at the radio again, stay up all night, and then rest again on Sunday until the contest ended on Sunday night. So that was kind of my motivation. But later I got into operating on the higher bands. But even on 10 or 15, there were, in the middle of the night, oftentimes those bands would close down, and I'd use them that time as an opportunity to rest. So I've always kind of avoided the single operator multi-band operations because I really just can't be competitive because of my perceived need to sleep.
And to eat as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, you can eat and operate at the same time. I learned that, but you can't sleep and operate at the same time.
What kind of DX have you done on 80?
You mean here from my home station?
Like from Aruba, for example.
All over the world. It's amazing.
I grew up in California, so I grew up thinking that 80 was great for California at night because that's where I heard most of the stations. But I never heard any DX on 80.
Really? Well, it's there. I think when I first learned that you could work DX, good DX, far DX, on 80 meters was when I was in Okinawa. I did not have an 80-meter antenna, but there was a couple of guys over there who participated in one of the contests one weekend on 80 meters. They were running, full power. I don't know the antenna, but I'm sure it was a good one. And they made contacts with 125 countries on 80 meters. And I just opened my eyes. I said, I like you, Eric. I didn't know you could do that. So it's always, I have also gravitated towards the low bands because I think when you make a long DX contact like that on 80 meters or 160, the thrill that you get is similar to the thrill that you got when you made your first contact as a novice. And I think one of the things that I try to do, and maybe others as well, is try to duplicate that thrill from the early days. For example, 2 nights ago, I worked the D-Expedition that's currently on South Sandwich, BP-8 STI, worked them on 80 meters, and, you know, it was like making that first contact with Gadsden, Alabama. I was just thrilled. And that's you know, that comes from, for me at least, for operating on the low bands.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. You're just back from Navassa Island, right? That was the 12th D-Expedition that you've attended?
That was the 40th D-Expedition.
That you were actually on?
Yeah. This was the 11th top tenor. That was this time last year. Well, not quite. I think we left Atlanta on the 29th of January, 2015, and the first group got on the island 2 days later, something like that. We staged out of Jamaica. And I might mention the other thing that I like to do is take along a video camera and video some of the highlights and then come back and have somebody who knows what they're doing edit it. And we've just finished editing the Navassa D-Expedition K1N. I'm pleased to say we've had sales of, we sold 500 copies of this thing, and they are others. There's 10 altogether, 9 others available on that website you mentioned earlier, K4UEE.com.
I'll put the link to that on the show notes page as well.
Yeah, please do. Please do. This last one, they're all good in their own way. My favorite is K1N, and it's it's just a great adventure. And I get emails all the time from folks who have bought the DVD and showed it at the club meeting, or showed it to some Boy Scouts to try to get them interested, or something like that. And then they send me an email and say, "This thing is great. I had no idea how difficult or time-consuming or complicated putting these things together is." And the video covers that aspect of the D-Expedition as well as the operating aspect. So,
well, from these stories and pictures that I see on the internet of the D-Expeditions, these are not necessarily vacation spots, and the facilities appear to be often quite primitive. Did you ever have a moment when you thought that this would be your last trip?
I have a couple of moments like that. Again, going to these really rare places, there's usually no infrastructure. There's usually no population, first of all. If there was, there's a chance there might be a ham there and they wouldn't be rare. But I remember in 2000, I did 3 expeditions that year, all the top tenors. And I was sitting on Kingman Reef. The first night we landed on Kingman Reef, and a storm came through, and we were in the midst of putting up one of our shelters. And the wind was blowing, the rain was horizontal, You didn't know how long it was going to last. You didn't know whether we were going to lose the tent and have it go into the sea. So we were all hanging on to the tent to make sure that, as best we could, that we didn't lose it. And I did have the thought, what in the world am I doing here? I've had the same thought on Peter 1. I guess certainly in 1993 on Howland Island, Howland, if that sounds familiar, that's the place that Amelia Earhart was looking for when she disappeared. That was an early expedition to a top tenner in 1993. We got stranded on the island, and we were low on food and water for 7 days. And I can tell you that being thirsty is the worst feeling in the world. And it was 120 degrees and hot, and we were out of water. And I definitely thought to myself, what in the world am I doing here? I don't think I ever said, I'm not going to do this again, but I sure thought about it.
Well, what keeps you going back? Yeah, it seems like childbirth. My wife tells me, when you're going through it, you're thinking, boy, I'm never going to do this again. But for some reason, you end up doing it again.
Exactly.
What keeps you going back?
Well, I think just like a woman who may say, this is a terrible experience and I hate every minute of it, and then it's over. And then as time goes on, the bad part fades, the pain fades, and the results and the good times and all seem to dominate your thoughts. So I think that's probably the best explanation. You forget about the bad part and you concentrate on the fun part, and you just say, I want to do that again. But I've got to mention it. I mentioned the itchy feet before. I still have them. I still want to see what's on the other side of that ocean, or on the other side of that island, or on the other side of that mountain. I still have that desire to go to another country and meet new people. But what we don't talk enough about is the camaraderie on the teams. I usually travel with pretty much the same guys. We've been together many times, most of us. I know that we can trust each other. I know that how people are going to react if we get into a situation that is, life-threatening or dangerous in some way. I know I can trust these guys not to lose their head, and apparently they can trust me to do the same, not lose our heads. And they're all good guys. I enjoy their company and being on an island together and setting up the infrastructure, putting up the tents, preparing the food, putting up the antennas, and then operating around the clock for 2 weeks with these friends of mine, which is what they've become. There's no substitute for it, Eric.
What skills do you look for in amateur radio operators to make them the right choice for de-expeditions that you've been on?
Well, that's a good question. Some people would answer by saying, well, they've got to be really good operators. They've got to be great. I got to have a mix of good CW operators and a mix of good sideband operators, and now I need to add some good digital operators. And that's true. But I mentioned earlier, when you're going to activate the rarest of the rare, the costs are quite high. I have been a leader or co-leader of 2 expeditions that cost $500,000, and the team usually puts up about half of that, and the DX community puts up the other half. So one of I won't say it's the primary requirement, but one of the requirements is these folks have got to have some money, because the costs can be anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 per operator. They've got to have time. Many of the guys are retired, or they've got their own business, and they're comfortable in leaving the business in the hands of others while they're gone. I mentioned earlier the fact that they need to be a coherent team. They need to be able to trust each other, and there would be nothing worse, and it has happened. There'd be nothing worse than to have a guy on the team who's a jerk and makes life miserable for everybody else. So I spend a lot of time making sure that we don't have anybody like that where we might suspect that he's going to cause trouble. So they got to be compatible. They've got to have the money because of the high expense involved. They've got to have the time because, again, you could be away for 3, 4, 5, 6, and even 7 weeks in one instance. Oh, and you've got to be a good operator too. Kind of hard to find, and this group that I tend to gravitate towards, meet all of those criteria.
Have you done any mini de-expeditions just to get the team together to see how you meld together before you make the big commitment?
A little bit of that, but if I can't fill the team with people that I have been with before and have confidence in, and we find ourselves in a position to invite somebody new, then I interview that person, and I've got to have at least 2 references from people who know them better than I or have been on trips with them. The only thing that we have not done very well, and we are considering, a new program where we find somebody who is up and coming, if you will. I guess that means younger, among other things, but somebody who could be a de-expedition leader in the coming years, and find a way to get them onto these expeditions and begin
grooming them,
Elmering them, yes, because the worst thing you can do is go someplace really difficult and not have an idea of what to expect, or better yet, have some experience maybe when you were not the leader, but when you were just a team member, and you went somewhere and you saw this happen before, and you say, that can't happen again. It's not going to sneak up on me. I'm not going to make that mistake, or I know what to look for. So there's got to be a way, and again, we're struggling a little bit with it, but we're going to come up with a way to be able to add new people that we can more or less train, or at least open their eyes a little bit as to what's involved. And when the time comes, and maybe soon, they'll be able to kind of take over.
Have you written the operating manual on how to run a perfect de-expedition yet?
I have contributed to one, and it's about 200 pages.
So it is a process. It's something that you're doing.
It is, and that in that 200 pages, you've got everything. But you probably could boil the basics down to about 20 or 25 pages. And so, yes, that does exist.
Although, Bob, the devil is in the details.
Yep.
So maybe it's good to have the 200 pages.
That's what that other 175 pages is for.
Right. I was going to ask you, with regard to these entities, the Philippines has 1,000 islands, and Micronesia certainly has 1,000 islands. How do you choose which islands that you do a de-expedition on? Could you make an entity out of all of these islands?
No, not a DXCC entity. The rules are pretty specific. All of those islands belong to Indonesia. That's the DXCC entity. And the only way that you can have one of those islands become a separate DXCC entity is if it's 350 nautical miles from the other nearest island. In other words, if you had 1,000 islands and 999 were near the mainland, but one of them was 350 nautical miles away, that could count. Now, instead, however, there is another program based out of the UK and run by the RSGB called IOTA, Islands on the Air. And each of those, not each of them, but I'm sure that within those 1,000 islands, There are probably 10 different island groups that do count for this award. As a matter of fact, if you haven't had somebody on the show to talk about the IOTA program, you should. It's very popular.
And that could create, obviously, a whole new interest in activating these islands, right? Beyond, once everybody has North Korea, if that happens, then this new contest with these new rules could actually create a whole bunch of new opportunity.
Well, it already has. I mean, I'm not doing it personally because it's, I'm so far behind. There are, the program's been in, I've got to say it's been around for 15 or 20 years. And I think there are something like 1,100 or 1,200 island groups. And they're identified, for example, Hilton Head Island is NA, North America 105 or something, It's in fact, just Google it. It's something that is extremely popular, and there's always somebody somewhere that's activating an island group.
If you wanted to start out DXing and you could only join one DX club, which one would you choose?
Well, I would probably choose one nearby. We're fortunate here in the Atlanta area to have the Southeastern DX Club. It's mostly Atlanta area members, but we've got members all over the world and certainly across the Southeast, about 225 members or so. And that's a great place to meet successful longtime DXers and learn from them. For example, we've got a DX Club meeting tonight, and the speaker is one of the fellows who's got over 300 countries on 160 meters, and that will be his topic. So it's nice to have a resource locally. We also have, if my interest was not DXing, or if I had another interest that was contesting, the Southeastern Contest Club, SECC, is also headquartered here. And so we're lucky in a metropolitan area like this to have two different directions to go. I'm a member of both organizations because I like to have a foot in both camps. But there are national organizations that are DX oriented. There's international organizations that are DX oriented. I'm also a member of the Chiltern DX Club. I'm based in the UK, and they've all got newsletters or they've got things that they publish on a regular basis, and I can hardly wait to get my monthly or quarterly copy so I can read what others are saying, and I always learn something.
Do you have any insight into how you would bring new hams or kids into DXing?
Yeah, I do. Let's pick them up at the point where they have gotten their license, because as a quick aside, most of the clubs, what I would call the horizontal clubs, Eric, where these are radio clubs that encompass many aspects of this wonderful hobby. They're not just DX clubs, they're not just contest clubs, but they're involved in everything. Most of those clubs, and there's 3 or 4 or 5 here in the Atlanta area, have programs where they will help youngsters, or anyone for that matter, study for and pass the entry exam, technician class exam. It seems to me where we all fall down is what we do with that new ham, whether he's 8 or 14 or 49, after they get the ticket. And this goes back to the way you and I learned the hobby, and that's from an Elmer, from a mentor. And so let's pick up there. That's the guy who has the interest. He may see a little bit of the magic, but he sees enough of the magic to get the license. So now what does he do? I think that instead of having this fellow confine himself to VHF and the repeaters, he should experience HF. And I think one of the ways that we get these people interested is through, let's say, inviting them and making it easy for them to attend a field day, which is primarily an HF, operation exercise. Having them come into your shacks during a contest and observe, or having them come in and sit down behind that microphone or behind that key and make some DX contacts. Again, these are people that may only have an HT. Working DX is working through a repeater to a guy in North Georgia, right? And the world of HF is unknown to them. I think that's where the magic is, and I think that if we will expose them to that, we can go a long way towards getting those people interested in getting on HF, and then directing that interest into contesting or DXing or rag chewing. Doesn't make any difference. But rag chewing with a guy in Hawaii or Alaska or Slovenia or South Africa instead of in the next county.
I see from your bio that you also scuba dive. From your world travels, what was your favorite dive spot?
I think the favorite dive spot. Well, by the way, I got interested in scuba diving when I was in Okinawa. I joined the local scuba club there on the base, and I just again fascinating. I thought it was. I guess I don't believe everything is magic, but I think ham radio and scuba diving are magic.
Yeah, I agree. I also scuba dive.
Yeah, it was kind of a surprise. We were down in the Caribbean. I think we were off of Puerto Rico. I've dived a number of places in the Caribbean, and they've all been wonderful. But this particular day, I found myself swimming through schools of 8 to 10 inch long, silver looking fish, which I can't identify. But you've seen them in the movies where there's like a billion of them, and they're all swimming in a direction, and then suddenly they shift and they go 90 degrees in that direction.
At the same time.
It's amazing. And I found myself in the middle of one of those schools, and I couldn't believe it. I've never forgotten that experience. I also have never forgotten the first time I encountered a shark face to face, because I was always called the chicken of the sea, referring back to the tuna fish, Charlie the tuna, I guess it was.
Charlie the
tuna, but this was in the Bahamas, and I'll never forget the dive master. We dropped the hook, and he said, let me go over and take a look. And he takes a look, and he comes up, and he says, I've got great news for you. And I said, oh, my. He said, yeah, there's a school of sharks right under us. And he said, come on in. And everybody jumped in but me, including my 14-year-old son, which I think because he jumped in, I figured, well, I guess I better go, or I'll be the laughingstock. And anyway, we swam among those sharks for about 30 minutes. And, I'm not afraid of them anymore. But that I'll never forget that. And it happened to happen on my 50th birthday.
Well, that's the secret of the lion tamer. You always do the show after they've eaten.
Well, maybe we were lucky. Our timing was just right.
I've done a lot of diving, but I've never seen a shark. At some point, I hope to.
Well, I guarantee you they have seen you because they hang out at the periphery of your vision. In fact, when you're down, if you will just stop for a moment and look as far as you can see, just where the visibility is fading away, you'll see them there because they're watching you. And they, usually don't come any closer. But sometimes you stumble across them too, and that's when it's a bit of a start.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Well, we talked a little bit about that. I think you need to, if you don't have a mentor, if you don't have an Elmer, you need to find one, and I think you find them in the local club. And maybe what you do is you start with what I called a horizontal club, a club that is a general interest club, because within this great hobby there are literally dozens and dozens of directions that you can go, dozens of very interesting things that you can get very interested in, and jump into with both feet. So if you can get yourself exposed to all of that, then maybe you can start picking and choosing which of those avenues you want to pursue further. Joining a DX club or a contest-orienting club right at the beginning may not be the best advice unless you already know that you're interested in DXing or you're interested in contesting. But for the guy who's coming back in the hobby, or for the new fellow who's newly licensed, whether he's, again, a kid or, an older person, go to that club, meet some people, start looking at the broad range of options that you've got to pursue, and then find something or two or three things that are of interest to you, and then if that requires that you go somewhere else or join another club to get a better education and a better feel and to meet people that know more about it than you do, then that's the next step.
That's great advice. And you can always change direction later on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got a guy as a quick example. This is a fellow that I met when I was on Saba about 5 years ago. He lives in Connecticut. He always wanted to be a ham. And he owns a house on Saba. And when we were down there operating from another location, he saw the antennas and dropped by and knocked on the door. And we have become fast friends. And in fact, I'm going down to operate at his station, which is now at his house on Saba, next month. But this guy has been licensed about 2 years. And he has done more varied things in this hobby than I have done in 58 years. He just is like a kid in a candy store. He says, well, what about so-and-so? And I'd say, I don't know anything about that. He said, well, let me tell you, so-and-so and so. He said, and I love it. And I said, well, that's great. He said, oh, do you know anything about so-and-so? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, let me tell you. I did this, I did that, and I met this guy. He is like a kid who cannot decide which direction he's going to go in. It's just a big, wide open field, and everything's exciting and new. And, I'm sure he wishes he'd gotten licensed years and years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. Bob, I want to thank you for coming on QSO today. You've been a fine guest, and I really appreciate finally getting you after, I think I've been pursuing you now for at least over a year. I'm so happy that you were able to take the time and meet with me today on QSO Today.
I appreciate the invitation. I've enjoyed it myself. And Eric, it's very nice to meet you. 73s.
73. That concludes this episode of QSO Today. Be sure to check out the show notes page on the QSO Today website at www.qsotoday.com. Put in K4UEE in the search bar at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart, Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.